Hi, I'm Jim Binnion of James Binnion Metal Arts.
And I'm Chris Ploof from Chris Ploof Designs.
We're here to show you a new tool that we've invented called the Press Buddy. It's something that's been very useful to us in our business of making mokume-gane. And we're going to show you how it's used and the various parts of it.
We're going to demonstrate the basic Press Buddy kit. We'll also demonstrate the Mandrel Kit that you can use with the Press Buddy.
So now Chris and I are going to show you how to set up the Press Buddy for safe use in the Bonny Doon press frame. One of the things, if you're using a Mark III like this one, you want to make sure that the 4-inch riser is in place for safe operation of the Press Buddy. So to set up the Press Buddy, you're first going to take the press adapter and an upper die. In this case, we're going to set up the drawing die. And you want to screw the drawing die into the Press Buddy press adapter. The adapter is threaded with two different threads, one that attaches to the die and one that is used to attach it to the press frame. So you want to make sure you get the right one. It's pretty straightforward. The wrong one won't fit. So you want to take it and screw it all the way on and then hand tight. You want to just make sure that it's nice and snug there. You don't need to use a tool to tighten it up, just hand tight. And this will keep you from damaging the threads that attach the die to the Press Buddy adapter. Once you have it on there, you want to set it into the press frame. And now you can go ahead and set it up on the press itself and set that screw in the center hole of the upper platen. It's very important to make sure that you're using the center hole and not one of the side holes. You always want to make sure that whatever you're doing in the Press Buddy is set up completely on center line in the press frame. So now that that's firmly tightened in place, you want to go ahead and raise the Press Buddy a little bit, the body a little bit, and make sure that it's not bound up in any way. And now you can insert the lower die into the frame. And at this point, you're ready to start mashing some metal. And now we're going to demonstrate the use of the Press Buddy for drawing or heavy reduction of material. In this case, we're going to simulate a mokume-gane billet with the piece of copper that Chris showed us a little earlier. Chris?
So we have our fokume. And as we said earlier, the biggest problem that we used to always have is the amount of reduction we have to put into this large billet before we can actually get it into a rolling mill and make usable sheet or usable ring stock out of it. This is really where this tool really shines, and one of the things that Jim and I have been using it a lot for lately is it gives you the ability to take this really large cross section and forge it down to a much thinner cross section really quickly. A couple key things to remember here. One, your work needs to be centered left to right in the dies. You don't want to have it off on either corner, on either edge. You do always want to work in the center line of the press, as Jim said earlier. The other thing that we also need to consider is we've got this round radius die in here. Much as you see the picture in the instruction sheet, and do refer to your instructions please, we need to be beyond the center part of that rounded die. You don't want to turn this into, as Jim and I have taken to calling it a watermelon seed, which essentially weighs, I don't know, a quarter of a pound and would be flying through the air at you. So safety first, obviously, safety glasses, safety equipment, but make sure you're centered left to right on the die, and also make sure you're just past that center line of the die. So I'm going to step behind the press, and we're going to actually put a bunch of work into this. Do note, not a magic bullet. You can't take this and reduce this all the way down 80% and expect to not destroy your material. We're going to reduce this probably about 30% here, do a cold reduction of about 30%, and then we're going to go anneal it and come back and keep reducing it until we can get it to fit into the rolling mill. So I'm centered on the dies, and I'm just past that center line. I'm I'm being fairly conservative in my reductions. I did say 30%. I'm going to make a couple of passes here. Since I predominantly work with mokume-gane in this, if we were to try and do all 30% at once, we could actually have some problems with the billets breaking apart. Of course, if you were just reducing copper or silver, or you'd poured a large ingot that you wanted to reduce of gold or any non-ferrous metal, and again, this is designed for use with non-ferrous metals. Don't use this with steel, with iron. This is for jewelry metals, for brass, copper, bronze, silver, fine silver, etc. You could go a little bit larger reduction, but I'm going to just take my time.
So each time that we're pressing, or that Chris is pressing, he's moving forward about half the width of the impression that he's making in the surface of the material. This is going to give a series of scalloped depressions on the surface. Once you cover the complete surface, you can either continue to work that surface, or you can flip it over and start working from the other side of the piece.
Here's another tip too, just to mention. I'm getting, so I don't have much to hold on to here on this end. You can see the end that I haven't done. It's where I'm touching with my index finger. I'm just going to flip it around so that I don't have to have my fingers in under the press buddy. Good habit to get into.
Yeah.
And then, just like Jim said, I actually like to flip it over when I go to work the other side, so I'm going to sneak up a little bit more on that 30% reduction we mentioned. So, to give you an idea, we've done quite a bit of reduction on this. As Jim said, we do have one top that's scalloped here, or one side that's scalloped. The other side has a few scallops left on it, but that bottom flat die has done a really good job of removing those scallops. So what we're going to actually do next is we're just going to change out this top die and put in two flat dies, and you'll see we'll be able to make this flat very quickly. In real time, this is about how quickly you can change the tooling on the press buddy.
So we're demoing this with the powered press. I have one set up in my studio that is a manual press, and it actually moves very quickly as well using the manual press. So you don't have to necessarily have a powered press. If you do, it does go a bit faster though. But this is not restricted to use with a powered press.
Okay, so now we're rigged up with our two flat dies. Basic rules still apply here. We want to make sure everything's centered in the press. We've used that middle hole, but we just have two flat dies that are going to come together. I'm going to just lift it really quick to make sure we have motion, and then I'm going to take this and I'm going to get rid of those scallops really quickly again. So a tip, I'm actually looking at the surface of the die here because there are going to be some dips, that occur from the edge of the die. The squared off edge of the die is actually going to be creating sort of a little shelf. Could be useful for some applications. That's not what I'm looking for now. So I'm running the press and I'm actually watching that material that's the narrowest cross section, and that larger cross section is actually getting pushed down on top of it. Just looking right at the lower edge of the die, you can see a little bit of daylight there, but when you know that you've gone far enough, the daylight disappears. So one more press and I'll show you. So you can see a couple small lines in here, but the scallops by and large have completely disappeared. You don't have the scalloped issues. There are a few small lines in here. Take just a brief second to also talk about one of the things here. These are made out of 4140 tool steel. So they are hardened, but they're not incredibly hard. For example, if you're doing a lot of flattening and you don't like that and you find that you're getting too much of an edge on it, there's absolutely no reason why you can't use just regular abrasives, files on these to modify and knock that edge back a little bit if you want. I like the crisp edge. It's what we've been using. It also allows for you to sort of almost use it like a sheet metal brake. If you wanted to have a nice crisp bend in a piece of sheet metal, you could do it in the two flats. But so what we're going to do is we're going to off camera go anneal this and do some more reduction and get it down to a small enough size that we could put into a rolling mill. So we started with a large shape, that was very similar to this, that billet cross section that we can't fit into a rolling mill, can't really do anything with other than forge by hand. With the press buddy, what we're able to do is we're able to take something like that and very easily, turn it into thinner material that we can put into a rolling mill or that we can use for ring stock. Pretty typically from this point, we'd either start rolling it if we were making sheet stock, or we'd cut square cross sections out of it and start square wire rolling it. But you sort of get an idea of what's going on here. It does deflect the material a little bit, again, because these dies are sort of sharp on the edge. You can finish them back a little bit. But here's an A piece and a B piece. So we're going to talk a little bit about forging with a press buddy now. You've already seen how we can reduce larger cross sections, but we're going to talk about actually changing the shape of something right now. We're going to take just a square piece of copper rod stock, and we're going to turn that square piece of copper rod stock into an octagon, getting close to a round. It shows the potential of the press buddy. The 20-ton press is or a larger press. The hydraulic press in your shop is the biggest hammer that you have. But this shows you some other ways to use it besides just reducing a Mokamegane billet to something that'll fit into a rolling mill. So Jim's going to demonstrate from square to octagon to nearly round.
So one of the prime aspects of forging something is to change its cross section. That's really your whole purpose. So you're going to start off with a piece of stock that you want to change to a different shape. So we're going to start with this square stock, and I'm going to put a reduction on the end of it, and I'm going to change its shape so that it, as Chris said, it goes from a square to an octagon, and then I'm going to round it off a little bit. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make sure that I am more than halfway into the die and that I'm centered. And I can make some pretty radical changes in the section of this material very quickly. This is something that would take you quite a while to do with a hammer, but we just did it in about a second. So I've put a nice reduction on one direction. And now I'm going to come in and I'm going to align it with that section. And I'm going to put a similar amount of reduction. So now we're starting to get something almost like a tenon if you want to do a mortise and tenon type of joint. You could use this as a way to reduce this section.
The other nice thing about the press buddy, as Jim mentioned, he's talking about lining things up, is really the accuracy. You're able to, you don't get any, I affectionately call it stupid arm when I'm forging. Eventually your arm gets tired and you get stupid arm. You don't get stupid arm with this. It's a lot easier on the body.
And in fact, this is one area where having a manual press may actually be to your advantage, because you can more carefully align it while you're working with it. But one thing you can do with the power press to make sure that you're right exactly where you want to be is you can set it on hold so that it doesn't drop down. And now I can say, yeah, that's really where I want to be. Okay, now I'm going to put the force to it and release it. And now I've got enough of an edge that I can actually use the edge to align the stock.
Jim's just correcting the end of the piece.
What happened is that even though I've stayed in the same space on the end of this stock, as I'm squeezing it down in section, it's getting longer, so it's moved off the end of the die. So it started to develop a little flange on the end, so I was correcting that with that last pressing. Now, I've reduced the section of this down a little bit, and I'm going to go and start working on trying to go octagonal on it. So I'm going to have it setting on edge this time. And it can be a little difficult to get that first flat going. So now I've started to knock the corner off of that square. Now I'll come to the opposite side. It will have a tendency to roll a little bit until you get a good flat on it. So now I've got the beginnings of the octagon happening on this rod, and if I want to take it and make it round, I'm going to continue to reduce it on the corners. And now I'm going to start rounding it off a little bit.
This is actually one of the hardest exercises, and it's actually one of the things that beginning blacksmiths first learn is square to round and round to square. And what's happening is, as Jim's working on this, it is having a tendency to roll a little bit on him. Also, the other thing that's happening as Jim's working on this, I think Jim and I are both dreaming up a set of swaging dies that you might see for the press buddies soon.
So at this point, it's getting pretty close to round, and if I really wanted a very round piece, I think I might start filing at this point to get the rest of the corners off. But I've reduced the section by a good 40% there, and
it
done it fairly quickly.
Took you about 3 minutes, yeah.
So that's our section on forging of square stock to round.
So another great thing that you can do with the press buddy is you can draw stock. Slightly different than forging in that instead of metal moving in all directions, metal is really going to be moving mostly in only one direction. If you've all seen a cross peen hammer that a blacksmith would use, that front end is for forging and that back end where the peen is for drawing material out. Jim's going to demonstrate how the press buddy works for drawing material. What we've done is we've actually set it up so we have the rounding die in the top, and then the flat die on the bottom. So not flat and flat, but we've got that rounded die, and then we've got the bottom die.
Again, it's very important to make sure that you're past the center line on the radius of the die, upper die. And so at this point, I've managed to reduce the thickness of the piece by a couple of millimeters, and I'm stretching it out mostly in this direction. So I'm going to flip it over and work the other side. Flip it again. And eventually you're going to get to the point to where you're going to have so much work in this, you're going to need to anneal it. At this point, I'm getting pretty close to a 50% reduction in section on this, and 50% is not a bad place to stop, anneal it, and then come back to your actual forging or drawing work here. So that's the drawing operation.
What you can note is Jim's significantly reduced the cross section, but we have not really widened the piece. Again, the metal's really flowing in two directions. It's flowing away from the two faces of the tool. So we're about to really go beyond the basics here with the press buddy. We've talked about drawing and forging and reducing materials. Now we're going to talk about how you can use it to bend very thick cross-sectional materials. Jim's going to step around to the front of the press to demonstrate that, so you have a better view of exactly what he's doing. And I think you'll be surprised at how much of a bend you can put into some very thick materials with the press buddy.
So I'm going to use the press buddy now as a clamp and as a bending brake. So I'm going to insert the material between the dies, and I'm going to put about 2,000 pounds of pressure on the gauge on the system. I've got it in hold, so the material is very firmly clamped between the dies. And now I'm going to take my persuader and I'm going to bend this material. So now I'm going to move it back a little bit and so now continue bending. Sometimes when you're working on very short pieces, you may have to use something as a punch to accurately center where the blows are happening. But if you've got a little bit more length there, you can just whack on the end of it and give it a good bending. And now we've taken a piece of very thick material and bent it into a form that we can do further work on.
So one of the other great tools for the press buddy is the ring Mandrel Kit. One of my favorite tools. This was one of the first tools that Jim came up with after we sort of just started making the basic kit. It's very useful for a number of things. The first thing that Jim's going to show you is ring bending with it, actually forming a ring into a round shape from flat stock. And then the next thing that we'll follow on with is actually how you can take and stamp that ring with a variety of patterns. Yeah.
So I've got a piece of silver stock here. This is about 1.5 millimeters thick, so not super thick, but we'll go ahead and use the kit here to bend it around the mandrel. Now here, you really don't want to put very much pressure on it at all, just enough to grab the stock so that when you start to push on it, you can bend the stock round.
We've mentioned those of you that have the classic press have an advantage. Maybe we didn't call it an advantage before. If you've got the classic press or the Mark III press with the hand pump, this is actually where you can just pinch the metal and you don't have to worry about damaging it or denting it at all. But you'll see Jim's actually able to do that too with the electric press.
And when you get to the end, you may need to use a hammer and a brass punch to do that last little bit of bending on the stock. At this point, I've got just a little bit more to bend down, and I'm going to use the punch, clamp it, and then hammer down just the tail end of this so that we get a fully round piece. So at this point, with just a minimal amount of tweaking, we've now got a piece of ring stock bent. Now imagine instead of this piece that we were working with something that was, say, 3 millimeters thick. It would be just as easy to do what we've just done to make this ring out of a very heavy piece of stock. Some of you may be asking, why the press buddy? Well, I don't know if you've done a lot of work with the hydraulic press. You probably have come to the realization that trying to stack a whole bunch of tooling under the platens of the hydraulic press can be a difficult, if not dangerous, process when you get too much on there or it gets too tall. So the beauty of the press buddy is that this frame always keeps the tooling in alignment. It's always centered. It's always aligned. So you can do things like stack this mandrel on top of this V-block and press on it and not have to worry about it spitting out the side of the press. And that really is the beauty of the press buddy, is that we can stack up tooling here and utilize the power of the press without having to worry about, is this whole thing going to come apart on me as I start to work with it? Or do I need 5 hands to hold all the tools in place while I'm working with it? And one of the other things that we haven't really covered before is you can use the press buddy in any orientation because it will always keep the tooling centered in the platen of the press. So if what you're working on requires that you be able to look at it end on, no problem. You just rotate it around, tighten the upper bolt again, and you're off and running
So thanks so much for watching. We've shown you a variety of things that you can do with the Press Buddy, but this is where I believe it actually gets to be a little bit better and a little bit more fun. We're going to hand this over now to the world. Hopefully you guys like what you see here and that you're interested in trying out the Press Buddy. If you need more information, please go to riogrande.com or call Rio Grande at 1-800-545-6566. Thanks so much for watching.